as well, but I'm going to start recording unless I hear anything. Jody, did you want to talk about the website?
We do. So the website is live, and the link is in the shared notes. So there's two parts to it. There's the public-facing part, and then there's the secret undercover part that you only get with the secret, top secret, exclusive password. So, which is very, very easy to come by. So the reason we did that was just to be able to track data a little bit better and with who's involved. So feel free to spread that password far and wide, or get it from Eric, either one, but just to track logins and that sort of thing. So please check out the website. That will be our main landing page for keeping information current. So one of the things that you'll see there are the dates of the months that our upcoming meetings are, but no dates yet. So we'll meet and get those decided as soon as we can, put them on the website, and then blast out an email and let you guys know they're there. So feel free to share the link to that website, and please do. It's live and ready to share. Also, if there's things that we're missing or you think could add to it or improve it, let us know that too. It's in very early stages, and if there's other ways we could be using it and you have ideas for that, it's all of our website, so let us know.
Okay, and I was waiting to see if Ruben was going to show up from College Star. He had a fabulous idea that we've run with, and I wanted to introduce you to this if you haven't seen it in the emails. We do now have a conference database. So one of the problems that we've been having is knowing where we can go to connect with other people in our area or whatever, and so we're not all necessarily bottlenecking one or two conferences. We want to start getting the word out. And so that was, Ruben's idea was to create a central database. So we made this into a form, and at the top of that form, I'm going to copy this into the chat for those of you who can't access the document. At the top of that form is a link to a spreadsheet, and that shows what people have entered into the form. So I want to encourage you, number one, if you have heard of a conference, it doesn't have to be explicitly about UDL. Maybe it's about inclusion in higher education or something where you see this is something where we can bring UDL to the conversation. Go ahead and put that in there. And you can see the proposal deadlines as well as sort of the conference. We're going to do our best to keep it clean. So after the conference start date begins, we'll wipe it off of here. But right now it's organized so that the most upcoming, or in this case, past proposal deadline is what's at the top. So you can,
And could I do a shameless plug right here? I've put this information down actually at the bottom. And Lillian, you're here on the call. Kaisha, you can represent Goodwin. But just to kind of give an example, South by Southwest has a great ed conference. And yeah, some of you are nodding and have been there. And we thought, we've got to get UDL into the conversation there. So, so Goodwin College, Appalachia State, and CAST went in together. We submitted a proposal, and it's at the stage now. South by Southwest is this thing where it's called Panel Picker, and the public gets to submit votes through the month of August for sessions that they want to hear. It counts for 30% of the acceptance. And so I put some information down at the bottom so you can vote for us. And tell your colleagues, share your colleagues. We have basically through this week, it's called Universal Design for Learning in Higher Education, a very clever, dynamic name. But it would be really exciting to try to get UDL out into different conferences that aren't just focused on UDL, as Eric was mentioning.
Okay, and Jody, I think you were going to talk about communication planning.
Yep, for sure. So on this theme of growth and outreach is we were talking as a little triad too, and with some of the other SIG members about increasing our communications within our community and beyond it as well. So some of the things that, some ideas that were thrown around were things like newsletters, using our UDLHE hashtag on Twitter, kind of really strategically, and other stuff too. But we're looking to see if there's anyone who's loves to communicate, that's a real strength of theirs, and they're our Twitter gurus and our newsletter people, to see if they might be interested in taking more of a lead with something like that. So other things we've talked about are like listservs, but we're trying to get to a certain number, around 200, before we go the listserv route. if that's something that you're interested in, if you can message one of us, me, Allison, or Eric, or add your name just below there if you're comfortable, we'll try and round up a few people at a separate meeting that's really kind of focused on communication planning, get some ideas together, and then put a plan in place for our next year. And just we're iterative, so wherever we start is where we start, and just trying to expand some different ways and get more folks involved. And again, if you have other ideas to add to that, please let us know. That would be great.
As our members continue to grow, our first major benchmark is when we get to 200 members, we're going to try to use that to leverage the IRN to support a listserv that has a cost associated with it. And so we feel like with 200 people, we can start putting pressure on them for that. So that's forthcoming, and we are continuing to set benchmarks for what happens when we get to 400 or 1,000. So we have grand visions, but we're not ready to share them yet. And we're very open for people contributing to that conversation as well. So, well, the reason that you all came here tonight is because we wanted to focus on the question about how we collect and use data related to UDL and higher education. Has anybody heard of the reporting criteria and the UDL reporting criteria that came out a few weeks ago? No? Okay, some of you have. I linked to it there if you look down below the table where people are introducing themselves, and I'm going to copy this into the chat for those of you who don't have access to the Google document. At the Summit 2016, we had a few people, a group of about 40 people that came to a pre-conference focused on UDL research, and we split up into different groups. Group one was about operationalization of UDL, and that group was headed up by Sean Smith and Kavita Rao, and included Dave Eddyburn, Christine Gruma-Farrell, George Van Horn, and Shira Yalam Chemowitz. So some great people on that committee, and they were charged with answering that age-old question, how exactly do we define UDL in such a way that we can measure it? And that was an incredibly painful journey for them, I'm sure. but they, I think, have done a remarkable job. And so what they developed is now called the UDL reporting criteria. And if you download that, you can see that they just updated it in its current form since the bottom of the page, July 19th. So this is very hot off the press. They consider this right now to be a draft that's going out to people like you to give them feedback. So you can use this opportunity to do that. So I'm just making you aware of it. But the way, because I was the chair of the second committee, which was focused on measuring UDL. And so, of course, we worked intimately with them because you can't measure what you can't define. And so I was involved with them to an extent at an arm's length. And so I can tell you that their journey really brought them through this struggle to not want to pin UDL down to the point where it ceases to be the dynamic, creative framework that it's supposed to be. And so in the end, I think that they came to what I would call a constitutive definition rather than an operationalized definition, where they look at what things are necessary in the process of designing and implementing UDL in order for us to say UDL happened here. And so things like identifying learner variability, recognizing barriers in the environment, proactively designing to address those barriers, and so on and so forth, is indicated here. And that is to some degree still subjective, but the fact that you intentionally move through these steps, they're arguing that's what makes it UDL. So this as a tool is brand new that I think we might be able to put use to in actually collecting data to support the practice of UDL in higher ed. So if you want to take a look over that for a moment, I'd be interested in hearing what your response is to that. We can have an okay silence here. There's wait time as we look over it.
And Eric, this is Tom. Just while people are taking a look at the document, I've had an opportunity to take a look at this a couple of weeks ago, and I sit on a number of editorial boards where we are in lots of different academic journals starting to see, like you said earlier, UDL articles coming through from new names in the field. It's really exciting. And we're also seeing some UDL article submissions that don't necessarily get it all right. Lots of people are saying that, if you ask people to read this text and then watch that video and then listen to this podcast, that's UDL. No, that's making people do different things serially. And so having this checklist actually really helps me from an editorial perspective to be able to come back and say, here's what we're looking for in terms of demonstrating evidence, in terms of making sure that your research is well supported. So I'm a real fan of the work that Kavita and the whole team are doing.
Yeah, I'm also a big fan of it. And for someone like what you were saying, Allison, earlier about how it can look different at every different environment, I really like that this is versatile enough that to adapt to the design environment that we're in. So for example, at our college, we have a course design framework that we use, like DFINC, we use backward design, like all those as well. So it's not a baby bathwater situation, it's an integration into our systems and what works within our context as well. And I really like that, like how it can be a tool that we can use in our design process as opposed to and improve it and integrate it with some different practices that our faculty are already doing and really familiar with. And it just adds so much value. That intentionality piece and the planning piece, I think, is huge, as opposed to it being about specific practices or checklists.
And my favorite thing to ask is, you could go around in universal design and architecture and you could say, oh, there's a ramp, check it off, it's accessible. But if the ramp leads to a door that doesn't open, it's really poor design and that ramp shouldn't be there. So it's, again, always going back to, what is the target, the goal, whatever word you want to use for that, and how is that intentional design in there? And it's informed by UDL as a framework. So I'd be interested too to hear if folks have researched other large frameworks that are really about processes, because I really think that's probably getting a little bit closer to what UDL really is.
So for those of you who have been researching UDL or who have been practicing UDL in the classroom or both, does this tentatively, and feel free that this is also a place where you can critique it. That's what they want at this point. Do you see this as something useful, or what limitations do you see for the reporting criteria?
I think a common misunderstanding, as you've been talking about, is, at least when I'm working with faculty, is to make sure that they don't see this as a prescriptive approach, right? The idea that you get into those guidelines, and as Allison just said, oh yes, I made sure that this document is accessible, check, so to speak. So I know, but I have to be honest with you, it's something we're struggling with a little bit as well. To help them to make those deeper connections to the design process.
If I could piggyback on that a little bit, and also go back to one of the previous questions that got asked, another organization that does this kind of, sort of giant body of knowledge of processes well is the project management folks. I have my project management PMP certification, and they have a body of knowledge that is that thick. And in terms of how you implement projects, they're working on folks who are managing projects for construction sites, hospitals, higher education, all across the spectrum, so they can't be prescriptive. Just like with UDL, we can't be prescriptive. And I really like the models that they have in terms of keeping it at the level of, here is the framework, and then here are the ways that you can demonstrate the skills. So that's another productive area if folks want to sort of sidebar into that. I don't want to take away from the main conversation, but I just wanted to bring up that association based on, and I see MB 727. I'm sorry, I don't think we've met.
Oh, I'm Mary Bidzilowitz from Cabrini University.
And thank you, Mary, for your comment and your ideas too.
Yeah, and so one of the things I'd like to ask is, as you're throwing some of this out, is there somewhere where we can be documenting this? So for instance, when I get off here, I want to look into some of this, because it sounds like exactly some of the kinds of information we're looking for. And then I guess for me, the other thing would be, you have so much more expertise, some really good models out there that one can look at, whether, like you say, it's happening at Goodwin College. I just really love to see what other folks are doing so that, you can sort of pick and pull some of that and say, oh yeah, that makes sense to me.
As for documenting, when folks have a specific tool or a resource, just throw it in the shared notes. So that's our spot for everyone to refer back to. There's also the recording, but the shared notes are there as well. Okay. So if you have a tool, or if there's a specific, like Tom's, that great example of project management, if you can throw that in the note after we mention it, we'll have a good record.
I'm making a section at the very bottom of the document for resources. Mary, I was wondering, were you talking about how you have some faculty who are just looking at it prescriptively, or Tom, you were saying people are doing this progression of multiple means of representation and so forth. And well, I think we would all agree that that's not UDL. I would question, is that progress nonetheless? And maybe we're scaffolding towards UDL. How would you feel about that contention?
I think that's a really good point to be, I really do think that that's a good point, a very valid point that you make. I mean, I certainly know that's where I started. If I really look back at those really early days, I remember thinking, oh, okay, well, what can I find to demonstrate this concept visually to this student in my class? So, I mean, I definitely started there. I think that's a really good point to make. And I think back to this idea of, for the rest of you, I work with faculty, that it's so easy for them to be overwhelmed. And as I said to Eric, I found that video on InnoSpire, and I found that it really connected with them when I said, just one thing. If we can just look at what you're doing, and maybe you can come up with one suggestion, one different way. And that resonated with some of them, particularly some of the science folks that we were working with.
And we mentioned before, so that was a reference to a takeaway that I got from Tom's session. So that's the idea of +1 is one of Tom's ideas.
It's a great idea, Tom. It's a great idea.
Thanks, y'all. And I'd like to encourage everybody who hasn't had an opportunity to speak up in this conversation, add your ideas and your approaches too. Even if you're just starting out, this is definitely the kind of conversation where more voices is better. And I'll apologize in advance. I've got to log off of here because I'm going actually over to the UDL IRN, getting ready for the back to school reading, where we're going to highlight a few books that are coming out. And so it's good to talk with everybody, and I'll catch you folks, I hope, at the top of the next hour. So thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Okay. So,
well, if I could just add one other quick point to just to support it. I had a teacher recently say, UDL is like the nuts and bolts, and it seems like something that's very simple to do, and they are like the nuts and bolts that I don't think, especially by the time you're in college, that I should have to support. But that is exactly what made all the difference. So I really like that phrase of nuts and bolts. I thought that was helpful.
And here at Goodwin, what we did was we basically started the same way. It's one change at a time, and then you build on that. For us, it was a job embedded activity. So it was like 15 of us in the first cohort. And so basically it took off from there. So being able to just change one item, the one item that we started with, the majority of us, was with the graphic on the syllabus. So that was the very first change a lot of us made after having Allison come in and do a intro session with us. So a lot of us went back, and that was the very first change we made. And then after that, if you start, most teachers do reflect. With us, it's kind of hard because we're doing everything at the same time. We're always teaching. So it's 15 weeks on, 1 week off, 15 weeks on, 1 week off, except for, the week of Christmas. So basically, we're doing this as we're teaching. So that's a very hard thing to do. And I was very aggressive. So I did 2 courses at the same time. And so like this semester, I'm going to focus on exactly one one that I haven't focused on a lot, but I had made like 3 small changes. But after doing my 135 class, which is the contemporary class, what I learned was some more changes came to mind. I was like, oh, I could do this or I can do that. And most of the time it's really the students making the suggestions. So when you open the floor up to the students, say, listen, I would like to hear what you need so that I can make the right changes for you. So giving the students the power to actually make suggestions and be open to those suggestions. So I had a repeater this semester in my Math 135 class, and it was funny because a couple sessions before that, students were saying to me, well, why don't you put this on the formula sheet? And I said, God, why didn't I think of that before? And then after that, I said, well, why didn't I just put the shapes with the formulas as well? So I put the shapes with the formulas. I started adding more to the formula sheet. And so when the student that was repeating this semester, and he failed very visibly the first time, I looked over at him because now he was participating in class, a very quiet person. He was very much participative. And I asked him, I said, so do you like it now? And he said, yes. And actually, he's one of the people that I noticed that he's in one of our videos now about taking a course with UDL. So I thought it was funny. I was like, I didn't know you got picked. So it was beautiful to see that students really engage and they actually give you information if you let it be known what you're doing. So that's one of the takeaways that I've had at Goodwin, is that empower the students to let you know what they need. And actually, sometimes those changes you made for the students with a learning disability actually helps the whole entire class and makes your life easier as an educator.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One of the things I know, Allison, from spending the couple of days up at the CAST at the end of July, looking at the guidelines and really recognizing that, you know, growth mindset, culture, sustaining pedagogies are really embedded in the guidelines. And so for me, my takeaway from that is we have become increasingly a far more diverse university. And looking at just even the visuals that I use a lot of visuals, and yet I really had to step back and recognize that my visuals really do tell a dominant narrative. And so many of my students don't necessarily see themselves reflected in the visuals that I was choosing. And therefore, the conversation that we had recently with faculty in our School of Education is, you know, is it reflected in our syllabus? Do these students sit in class? And do they feel welcomed? And do they see themselves as being members of our School of Education, and are we doing everything we can? And so just talking about the fact that embedded in those guidelines, there is increasing power to do all of this was really very exciting to think about.
Tian Hong, I think you had your hand up.
I have a question. I was looking at the reporting criteria, and I felt like I've been doing the step 1 and 2, but I have no idea how to do step 3, the assessment part, because some of the things I've been advocating, like one physics class, it was abstract concepts that the students are having a hard time understanding. So we created 3D simulations as part of the lecture. But how do I assess whether this practice, this addition has helped to students? Or like we've been adding the reading estimate reading times to all the reading materials and helping students to plan their study time better. How do I assess whether this will have a positive impact on the students' learning? Before I see this reporting criteria, I've never thought about how do I assess it, but now I see it. I have no idea how I could do that.
Anybody have any ideas for that?
One idea that I'm still learning about, so please jump in because I'm sure there's people here who know more about it than I do. But I went to the Improvement Science Conference in the spring, and that's something that, and I'll throw the link in the chat. And one of my big takeaways from Improvement Science was how to plan together to plan small improvements and measure them. So and that's what we, like at our school, we're starting to do projects and that do really intentionally implement UDL at the classroom level. We've done some design stuff, but we want some like rapid response, iterative design stuff within the math faculty and within nursing are the two that we're looking at. But we're going to try this improvement science idea, and I'll put the link in the chat, which will explain it much clearer than I can, or maybe I'll jump in, or someone else if they're more comfortable with improvement science. But it's something that I'm just learning about, and with my team to tackle that, because it's dynamic, it's changing, it can't wait till a KPI report. It's like I teach on Tuesday, I teach again Tuesday night the same class. Like what changes can I make while I eat my supper? So yeah, so that's something that we're trying. No idea how it's going to go yet. I'll keep you posted. But if anyone else has ideas on improvement science or others, please jump in.
Jody, I wanted to piggyback off of that, because improvement science has definitely got some great ideas and great leads. They can help you think about some of those, they call them like crayon to napkin approaches here, where you're quickly collecting data. So just a quick example for you is think about intermediate outcomes that would affect students' learning. For example, they're like perceptions of their confidence in going into the test or something like that. So you could do a quick poll right before you are trying whatever new thing you're going to try, and ask about students' confidence. And then you could try your technique for a class or two and do another poll. How are you guys feeling about whatever it is? And then that gives you a little bit of data to know whether or not that technique is at least improving an outcome that you know is related to students, performance on the test, such as their confidence.
Beautiful. That's a great example. Thank you.
That was one of the two projects that, so I'm looking at the UDL reporting criteria, and I'll make sure that I'm answering your question. So it looks like they split three into three parts, where I'm seeing A as being, you plan to implement UDL in this way in 2C, and then now you're saying, and this is how I actually followed through with that in 3A. So you're documenting the practice that you did to follow through on your plan. But it sounds like you're really focusing on 2B here, where you're looking at the outcomes. Is that right, Jianrong? So 2B is, in addition to describing the overall outcomes, describe UDL components in relation to outcomes. Is that what you're looking at? I think. Okay, I think that was what she was saying. I'm dropping in the chat here. This was very undeveloped. It was something that we started in the PET project, kind of fizzled out a little bit, though the work still is yet to be done. What I had started doing with this is look through the claims of what UDL claims to support. So specifically looking at developing expert learners. What does that mean? So they're resourceful, they're knowledgeable, they have executive functioning skills, etc. And I looked for dependent variable measures that already exist, that were not created by UDL people, because we don't want to create, like we're on both sides of this equation. And so these are the starting of several different measures that I think could be used to determine if UDL accomplishes what it claims to accomplish. This is very much an open document that I've encouraged people to contribute to, and that hasn't happened, but I keep trying. So yeah, feel free to use it as it is and contribute to it. But that might be one way that we can approach it, Jianrong, is to look at determining what kind of barrier is it. Are we seeing the students don't have a sense of self-efficacy, like they're not able to take control of their own learning, particularly with time management? And then is there a measure that would allow us to see if our design affects that positively, and then actually test that? What do you think about that?
I'll admit I missed a little bit of what you said, Eric, because I was clicking around the improvement science website. But when you said about problems, it just made me think too about that problem-centered or problem-specific user-centered principle of improvement science too, like helping to find the problem or the barrier or however you want to frame that, but what we're working together to solve through a design solution really does help. And if other people have experience with that, one of the big things I've found is switching from and helping faculty switch from response to design. And once that switch is made, a lot of doors open up, and connecting through these different like problem-centered or even the goal-centered backward design have so many similarities with coming at some of these, some of this in terms of the implementation of it and how we measure it and how we know if we're getting better at it. Sorry if that was a little convoluted.
Eric, I'm looking at your document, and here in Pennsylvania, we use the WIDA for assessment for English language learners. So that could potentially be something that could be in the document as well. Allison, you're familiar with the WIDA? Yeah.
I am. I did a crosswalk with UDL and WIDA. It was one of my early CAST assignments. And I go back to, UDL by itself, I don't know if it's enough. I'm just going to say that. But it's a UDL for something. If it's UDL for supporting English language learners, UDL becomes invaluable in that design. Another big buzzword now is student-centered learning. It's UDL for that. And so, I recognize that within the guidelines, we have the expert learning as the goal, but what is the expert learning in? I think that, again, is something that is fluid and is up to us to really define.
Right.
Tianhong is asking in the chat, can you expand on switching from respond to design? Can you clarify that? I'm not sure I fully understand.
Oh, sure. Sometimes, like we all know this, when we're working with students, faculty sometimes want to know, like, how do I respond to this? I need to get to know John and Nancy and everyone before I could possibly plan for all their different learning needs. And one of the things that we really work hard to switch and make that mental shift is that, in fact, you don't have to know everyone's everything about everyone. You need to know about how variable learning is, and that we have this handy framework that helps organize all these different all these different parts of learning variability into these three principles we call the UDL framework. And so by using those principles, we can design for all these different folks up front, and it really reduces your response time. So we give the architectural example, as a lot of us do, of like going to build ramp over here, ramp over here, ramp over here, as opposed to rethinking, having the chance through course redesign to redo the building or parts of it, right? In an iterative way, of course, like it's not baby bathwater, throwing everything out at once, but really making that switch in thinking from response to design is one of the precursors to having like lasting change. From my experience, I'm interested if others have found that too, but that's really been the nugget that has switched for many faculty, and then they start seeing through that UDL lens, that design lens, and then the solutions are limitless.
Right. We talk a lot about, making those deeper connections. And I think, as Allison said, that ramp needs to go somewhere, that there's a purpose for it. I think that's a part of the design. What is that purpose?
Totally. The goal, I'm going to show you a drawing that I'm kind of embarrassed about, but I saw it at the first IRN summit, and it was from, I just want to give credit, George at Bartholomew District School Board. Did I get that right? I'm looking at that.
The BCSC, George Van Horn?
Yes, thank you. So it was part of his presentation. So it was this, but I think of it as UDL for systemic change or for organizing initiatives. And I don't know if you'll be able to see this really well, but on this side, on this side, it's like different arrows in different directions and like all the different initiatives that happen at our schools. And then that UDL is like this big arrow that the initiatives can gather under as opposed to replace. And that really stood with me about the design response thing as well, because it's not throwing things out, it's integrating it in and organizing it. So there's so much, like, and I love how strengths-based UDL is. And so it's not that we need to throw out different things or add another arrow, it's that actually UDL can be that umbrella to organize so many of these initiatives. And that really stays with me too in terms of, how we can try and make those organize that shift in a UDL informed way without abandoning a lot of the good initiatives that are happening.
So to try to keep us on the idea of how we're using data for this, how are we, would data make a difference? So I'm thinking about how to frame this. When Tian Hong is asking about, it is more difficult to retrofit a course than it is to design from the beginning. And the way I'm interpreting that in this context as a support staff for faculty is I'm gonna get more pushback from the faculty, that the barrier is not just for the students, but for the faculty themselves in designing this. How can we use data and collect data to provide evidence that would help get them over that hump? Has anybody tried that before, where you collected written white papers or just collected data that may or may not be officially published, but that you use to try to convince faculty or staff in the school to make change?
So for us, one of the things is retention is the big issue at our college. So basically we're using, even though it may not be quite accurate, but we're using the retention levels in our classes as one of those mediums. So for those of us that are doing UDL classes, we find that students are actually coming to class more. They are staying more, staying longer, as opposed to dropping off the first week or the second week, especially in math. By the third week, they're gone. So being able to show that within week 13, you still have a full class of 20 students. I think that's just as powerful information or data. So basically, we've been using attendance as one of our collection points for retention. The pieces that I've been collecting is I actually have my students do a portfolio at the end of math. So that way they collect the information that they want to show that they have done well in respect to their goals that they set at the beginning of the semester. It really doesn't count for anything. They ask me if it's points. I'm like, it's not points, it's just a personal statement of your growth throughout the math course, your feelings for the math course, how was it different if you're a repeater, and things like that. So I've been collecting portfolios as one of the things. And then of course, any unsolicited statements from the students, such as this class was different than the first time I took it. You know, what you did in this class was amazing. I've never learned math this way. You know, whatever that unsolicited piece of evidence is what we're gathering mostly. So more qualitative data as opposed to quantitative data. So yeah, we're kind of looking at how do we collect evidence now at Goodwin. So that's pretty much where we are, especially for the first cohort.
And one of the things I think you all have done really well is it's really hard to say, well, here's a UDL school and here's our non-UDL school. So we have our control group. But the fact that you have a cohort going through and thinking consistently, you're integrating UDL in your own ways, in your own classes, but you're thinking about that common problem of practice retention. And so I think it would be interesting to be able to develop similar cohorts and other, across other universities to be able to say, well, this is the cohort who's integrating UDL in their own ways. You know, the science professors will do it different from English, and, that UDL framework is what's consistently being implemented differently without that cohort. And that might, again, give you some leverage with, gathering some numbers or gathering those statements. But I think Goodwin, that cohort model has been really very interesting and strong.
Yes, we have. Actually, we just started a new project with students that receive nutritional benefits SNAP program here in the state of Connecticut. So we started with a learning community. So all our developmental, so math, psychology, and developmental English, we are together as a little group of a learning community, and the students will travel together. So it's a group of 10, trying to keep them together and sustaining them through the UDL model. So basically, they can't have any instructors that haven't taught or haven't learned UDL. So basically, it's all UDL fellows for the first 2 years of their, and then we'll release them and see how well they do, basically. So that's our pet project. So we're going to go present at Lane, I guess, in November, I guess, around the same time that everybody be a good one. So yeah, we're doing like crazy things. So yeah, so no rest for us at Goodwin, but collecting data was one of our things that we just started talking about recently as well. So.
Well, William, I know that you at SUNY have a cohort-based model as well that you guys have been rolling out for a few years. Have you used data at all in that process? Do you want to speak?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and you're sparking a lot of thoughts for me. I'm just listening to Keisha and thinking about the retention issue. So I wear a bunch of hats, and that makes my my life a little bit unmanageable at times. I work on a project for the community college in our community in Syracuse, New York, and we began to implement some UDL training for faculty about 3 years ago. We, for the first time this year, have been able to not only start surveys with, well, there's a lot going on in my head right now. What we've been trying to do is to get at this sort of idea of how do we demonstrate the benefits of UDL is we've been looking at student perceptions of their learning experiences. And we've been taking sort of a baseline of what their perceptions are at the beginning of a semester, for example. And then we will survey them later on in the semester. The idea of the first survey is to, in a sense, get a sense of what their prior learning experiences have been up until that point. And then they're in a class now that a faculty member has been trained to some extent in using UDL principles and has designed a piece of that course with very intentionally with some UDL principles. Then we survey the students again at the end of the semester or sometime after that UDL implementation to kind of get a gauge of where are they now in relation to that class they're in compared to the first survey, which was their prior learning experiences, and to see what kind of shift there is. We've been able to find from our data from the fall of 2017, we can find some small significant results in terms of shifts in perception. And slightly larger significant results for students with disabilities as a subgroup of those students. This semester, we're trying to implement some control groups. We're trying to be able to compare those classes that those students are taking with as close as we can get with a control group is a different faculty member teaching the same course. Because we can't ask somebody who's been UDL trained to do two different models in the same class for obvious reasons. We're not sure where this is going to go. We're still trying to sort of get our control groups lined up, but we've started the surveys among our students who are in the classes with the faculty that have gone through training. That's what we're kind of looking at right now to try and gather some data. But I like this idea really of retention, looking at retention. It just strikes me that since we have, like this year, we have 35 faculty that went through our summer training this year, that maybe there's an opportunity, because like Keisha was saying, at this community college, the retention is the big issue. It's different in my position at Syracuse University, where I'm teaching grad students. That's not such really the issue. But at the community college, it's a really big issue. And it just strikes me that if we could get an accurate count of a lot of our UDL faculty's original enrollment at the beginning of the semester and at the end of the semester, and you can just compare that to, so to speak, control groups, same classes, same subjects, but different teachers, and just be able to compare between our UDL faculty and our non-UDL faculty, what those retention rates look like, I'd be really curious to see what we get. And that might actually be not a difficult thing. That's institutional data. We don't even necessarily, we don't have to even go through the IRB, I don't think, to really even collect that data. It's just institutionally collected data.
It would probably be exempt because it's business as usual. You're not putting them in a negative condition per se. Yeah. But we only have about 7 minutes.
You're muted, Eric. Just
So we only have about 7 minutes left, and I'm going to leave about 5 for Jody to close out. But one question that I really was anxious to get to is, I know that right now we see the most significant and substantial UDL success in smaller colleges or community colleges where faculty don't necessarily have expectation to conduct research and publish and so forth. Whereas R1 universities, we have people that are looking for research like this, but are not necessarily in a position to invest a lot of time in their teaching. And so it's kind of a catch-22 situation. And we were wondering if there might be opportunities with this SIG and the larger community to connect researchers to people who are doing the practical work in smaller and community colleges to make some of this happen. So I just started charting based on things that I was hearing in the conversation, some research ideas down at the bottom of the page, and there can be more here. It sounds like there's a lot of interest, and I really agree with this. I know Tom sells this a lot, this idea that retention is one of the core values that we should be going for with UDL and higher ed. Can we collect data with that? So I want to encourage us to be looking for partnerships and to play to your strengths and allow other people to play to their strengths. That's really what this community is for. So yeah, thoughts on that, and then Jody.
Totally. Well, thank you all for being here, and I hope that even for those of you who didn't click unmute, still there's lots of ways to participate. So I hope that it was valuable. And if there's, as we go forward, like the question about how to use data, how to conduct research, I think is one that this group has a lot of opportunity to do some more thinking and practice and connecting with, to offer some ideas. And I really encourage each of you, and Allison and Eric do as well, to connect with each other outside of this group. So if something happened that sparked, please follow up with them. Don't wait till November. One of the ideas around the SIG is that it's kind of a water cooler. So we meet here, we hang, we learn some new things, but then we go back to our classrooms and our offices. So it's up to us to reach out outside of the water cooler. Like we'll all be here same time, same place kind of thing, but make those connections yourself. Because I think those, and finding places who are just a little bit ahead of you, or a shared goal, or shared demographics, or you're passionate about the same discipline even, whatever that looks like for you, we really encourage you to reach out outside of this shared time as well. Also with kind of next steps in terms of our SIG group, if you have other ideas on topics you'd like to see, perhaps topics you'd like to host, if there's a special area that you'd like to showcase, or some work that you're doing, we've experimented and are looking at some different even format ideas. Like, do we want to do like a talk show, have a guest on and kind of interview them, and then ask questions, like have some participatory questions, right? Would that be of value to this group? Is this kind of open forum what we're needing at this time? Is there a mix? Do different topics work better with different formats? So please give it a think and let us know. We're very open to this being something that we all inform and we all share, because it's all of our time and we have a lot of expertise to share too among our group that we want to make sure we highlight. And yeah, I think those were our main closing comments. And just want to thank each of you for taking the time to be here. It's a real pleasure to be among this group. Allison and Eric, or anything else before we close out?
I just have a quote from a little kid that is stuck in my head, and it's thumbs up for rock and roll. He had just learned to ride his bike. It's a great YouTube video that's kind of gone viral. And so thumbs up for rock and roll, everyone. Because we're tackling big questions. And I think the core thing that I keep hearing over and over is UDL really is a value set. And so, you know, just kind of thinking about how it's supporting those core values is always interesting. So thanks for having us. Thanks for joining.
All right. So stay tuned. Check
Have
the
a great night, everyone.
email for our next
Or
date.
day, wherever you are.
We wish you well. Bye for now.